Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hi, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network, and I am your host, as usual, Giovanna. I'm so happy you've joined us, because this week we're going to be talking about being single. Shout out to Ben F., who recommended this topic. And he actually recommended that on the Instagram page. So if you want to see more stuff on Instagram, you can follow us at GSMC_relationship. And maybe you can suggest something and I can use it. But yeah, so anyway, we're gonna be talking about being single. For one, how people are single. So there are some people who are single involuntarily and some people who are single voluntarily. And actually, psychologically, there's a lot to do with that, depending on the type of attachment theories that you have. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the beginning. We're also going to be talking about how hookup culture may change after COVID and everything. So it was a Bustle article where they interviewed a couple different relationship experts to see what they had to say on the whole matter. We're also going to be talking about 10 things that you can do while you're single to make the most of being single. So let's get started talking about attachment theories and why you might be single. So the interesting thing is, being single has actually gone up since the 1970s. So they actually, surveyed people who were single, and it has gone up from 28% to 48% from 1970 to 2018. So right now, nearly half the population is single. What I think a lot of that has to do with the bias of being single. Now, there still is a bias of being single out there, because you always hear the sayings like, "Oh, when are you going to make me a grandparent?" Or when are you going to settle down and find a nice person? You know, so you're always going to be asked things like, "Oh, why are you single?" You know, and maybe you might be single because you actually want to be, or if you don't want to be, that's just going to add to your self-confidence for that. So in the 70s, though, it was definitely a different time. I mean, people are going to get married quicker and have a family quicker. I think now, gender norms are a little bit different, and people are okay with not wanting kids is also something a little that is more accepted than, say, in the 70s. So things are different, and so I think that has a lot to do with societal norms, why being single is on the rise, and the issues of gender and things like that. I think has a lot to do with it. But one study has been done about why people, it basically separated two different types of people. So people who are voluntarily single and people who are involuntarily single. More research has been done on people who are involuntarily single, as you'd imagine. The least amount of research, which I will get into a little bit more later in the podcast, is actually people who have secure attachment. They grew up with a secure attachment, which again I'll explain in just a second. But who are voluntarily single. So they are well-adjusted adults who just prefer being single. And that is the group that has had the least amount of scientific research done. But I think that in psychology, scientists are going to fall under the same trap as everyone else will be. And if something isn't really sexy or inviting, they're not going to study it. So I think that the people who are voluntarily single and are well-adjusted adults are probably going to be the least likely of people who are going to be studied. So anyway, let's get into the different types of attachment theories. So in psychology, thanks to Sigmund Freud, who was a psychologist in the 19th century Austria, he was really into how your development as a child affected your relationships as an adult. And we still kind of view that. Sigmund Freud was a very strange guy, but for his time, he was doing things okay. I mean, he was definitely problematic, and there were some things, but I mean, for the time and with the information that he had, his theories are still used today, which is pretty impressive considering psychology is a very new science, all things considered, because the brain and mental health is not something we can tangibly see. You can take apart a cadaver and study, your inside organs, but you can't really understand why your chemicals and your brain works the way it does sometimes. So basically, when we grow up, our parents are going to raise us a certain type of way. Now, they're going to be parents who are a little bit more avoidant. You might be a Lasky kid. And a Lasky kid, for those of you who don't know, would be a child who, say their parents had to work. And when you got home, you were in charge of doing your homework and making dinner until your parents got home. So you kind of had to look after yourself. There are other parents who had a little bit more anxious attachment. Those are going to be like helicopter parents. And those parents don't really trust the child, want to keep the child very safe. And that is actually going to impact their self-esteem. And they're never going to learn how to take care of something themselves. And then there is secure parenting. And those parents are the ones who are going to love the child unconditionally. So the kid knows that their parents are always going to have their back, but they give them enough room to explore the world as they please, and that will give them the confidence as adults to know that they have that thing to fall back on, but they're safe to explore the world on their own. And then there is a fourth type, which is kind of a combination between avoidant and anxious attachment. And there's also a type of attachment behavior that is for people who grew up insecure or anxious and went through quite a little bit of therapy, and now they are secure. So they still have that experience from their childhood of the maybe unhealthy attachment theory that they grow up, and then they learned how to unlearn that, and now they are secure adults. So I think that may be the most interesting from my opinion, because it shows that people can change their attachment and how they grew up. What we're actually going to get into the second theory, or I'm sorry, our second segment is how these different attachment theories will affect you if you are a single person, because each attachment theory is going to lead you down a different relationship path. I do want to mention that let's say you may be listening to this, and mind you, this is a very broad overview of attachment theory. There are plenty of reading material out there and studies and things like that about attachment theory. So if this is something that kind of interests you, I invite you to go, Google that and see what you can find on it. But because it is incredibly interesting, but I want to remind you that you can always change. If you are listening to this and you think that you may have grown up in an insecure or an avoidant household, and you fear that it may be affecting your relationships as they are today, you can change that with therapy and with counseling. You can become someone who has a secure attachment. Just because you grew up that way does not mean you have to stay that way for your whole life, because it does definitely affect how you view relationships as an adult. If you had parents that did not show you a lot of love, you may grow up and desperately seek for that love, and you may look for that love in unhealthy ways because you were not shown as a child healthy ways to show and receive love. And so this may lead you down a path that will lead you toward unhealthy relationships, and then you'll have a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of constant relationships that aren't successful and don't make you feel good. And we don't want that. So this is just a very broad overview of the different types of attachments. If this is something that is interesting to you, definitely look it up, and always remember that you can always change and rewire those neural pathways in your brain, so you can have a little bit more healthy relationships and more relationships that you're going to gain more from. So with that introduction, we are going to pause for a quick break, and then we're going to get into how all of these attachment theories are going to affect your single status or how you go after relationships. So we'll be right back.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back. So in this segment, we are going to talk about how the different attachment theories are going to affect your singleness or lack thereof. So basically, if you have an insecure attachment style, which is those styles include anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, the secure attachment, that is going to be the secure types of attachment. So the insecure attachment are those other two. I'm really going to be just focusing on 3. There are 4, as I discussed in the first segment, but this study really only focused on avoidant, anxious, and secure. So those are going to be the ones that I'm going to focus on, because it seems like there hasn't been a lot of study on the 4th style of attachment. But if you grew up having an insecure type of attachment, you are more likely to report that your relationships, so if you grew up with a not very solid relationship with your parents, you're more likely to report not having very stable relationships in your adult life, which makes sense because that's how you grew up learning about the world. So the secure attachment is going to equal happier relationships. And basically the attachment system is an innate neurobiological system that drives the need for belonging and closeness, which is common in human beings. It's also the attachment styles you can also see in mammals like chimpanzees and monkeys and things like that. But I'm going to first talk about anxious attachment. So anxious attachment causes hyperactivation of the attachment system. So if you're someone who has anxious attachment, you're going to see things like heightened anxieties, worried thoughts, mistrust in your partner, preoccupations, which tend to drive people away. You're going to have fear of rejection. You're probably a very jealous person. You may have fear of abandonment, challenges in communicating, and you might be too connected with your past partners, which is never going to make your current partner very excited. So all of these anxiousnesses will it's going to cause you to jump quickly into a relationship. You're also going to become sexually active and intimate before you are emotionally intimate. And this is going to lead into you becoming bonded with a person before you who may not be a good match for you, but because you are bonded with that person and you have jumped into a relationship with them, it causes long-term unstable relationships. So it definitely is because you are so afraid of if you are someone who is dealing with an anxious avoidant, an anxious attachmented person yourself, or your partner is, you're going to find that these things tend to drive people away out of the relationship. So you're constantly looking for a relationship and you want this relationship very desperately. But because you may have jumped into a relationship too soon, or you're very anxious, or you second guess yourself, you second guess the relationship, you think that they may be cheating on you, there's the jealousies that come up, it's going to push your partner away. So it's going to lead you to being single, or if you're jumping into an unhealthy relationship too soon, and you don't really realize that may not be a great match for you. So that's kind of the breakdown of the anxious attachment person. The avoidant attachment, so these guys, they're going to manage feelings of vulnerability by maintaining their distance from others via a range of behaviors, feelings, and thoughts. So if you are avoidant attachment, you are going to have a reduced need for intimacy. You assume relationships will end in pain and failure, and you will steer far clear of relationships. So a person with an avoidant attachment, they're going to be emotionally flat. And because of this, they're not going to share a lot about themselves. So the problem that arises if you have avoidant attachment is that it is sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself that all relationships are bad, and you guard yourself from having a relationship, it is going, people aren't going to want to be with you because you're not sharing details about yourself, you're not being intimate, you're not being trustworthy. A lot of this does have to do with trust and communication. Whereas in the first one, an anxious avoidant person may be sharing too much and going too quickly into things, and that's going to push people away. The avoidant person is going to just close off completely. And it proves to them, because people aren't going to want to be in a relationship, that because they are single all the time, it proves that relationships are just going to cause hurt, and therefore they're going to be involuntarily single. So for anxious and avoidant, you may find that your habits are pushing people away, and you find that you are single a lot of the times. And the last one is secure attachment. So these people are going to be people who are happy being single. So they the attachment needs are met in relationships other than romantic or their sexual needs are met outside long-term monogamous relationships, and they are also the least studied or understood groups of people. So you don't have to be anxious or avoidant when it comes to relationships and attachment to be single. But it may help you understand the different types of people who are out there and may get into a relationship. Now, if one of these or more rings very true to you, you can learn how to become more secure in your relationships. Now, people who are have secure attachment, they are going to have much happier and healthier relationships. If you're someone who is avoidant or anxious with their attachment, that's going to lead to extremely unhealthy relationships. Now, in my head, I pictured someone who is avoidant and anxious, like put together in a relationship, and you can only imagine what kind of relationship that would be. But I feel like I see it a lot in people who, at one end, someone may be very anxious, and at the other end, someone may be very avoidant, and those are never happy relationships. And if you are single, the anxious, I see someone more as a serial monogamist. That's the type of person who's going to jump from one relationship to the other, trying to seek some sort of attachment with a person. But if you're not doing it in a healthy way, you may find that you are consistently stuck in unhealthy and unhappy relationships. So if that anxious one really kind of hits home with you and you find yourself as a very mistrusting, anxious, and jealous partner, that might be something to look into, seeing how to become a little bit more secure. Because basically, when you are someone who grew up with an insecure attachment and has learned to overcome it, is called earned secure attachment. So again, someone who was an insecure attachment person, but through forms of therapy becomes a secure attachment. So that can be you. You can do that. But it is going to take a lot of work and therapy. But kind of like what I discussed in my self-help podcast and self-love podcast is you can learn by changing little small things each day to help make your attachment a little bit healthier. And that is something that you can do when you are single. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more at the end of the show. But while you're single, try to figure out if you fall into one of these categories or you relate to one a little bit more than the others, because then you can focus on how to make that better and how you can make yourself healthier and your relationships healthier before you step into a new one. And because if you put the time in and you focus on yourself before going into a relationship, it's going to be worth it, because you're going to be in a relationship that is a secure, happy, and healthy relationship. And who doesn't want that? So this is just one study too. I wanted to share it because it had a lot of information that I really enjoyed, and I think attachment theory is very interesting. But I invite you, if this is something, again, just Google it and learn a little bit more about it if you do want to learn about that sort of thing. But yeah, there are plenty other resources to see of why people are single and who want to be single and who doesn't want to be single. But I would love to learn more about secure people who are very happy being single, but they get their form of love and sex and happiness through things that are not romantic relationships. So maybe that's you. And if that is you, please comment or direct message me on one of the social medias. I love to hear about your story and how you react to your secure attachment and your choice to be single, because that's super interesting. So we are going to take a quick break. But after the break, we're going to be getting into some interesting stuff, because we're going to be talking about how COVID-19 may be affecting hookup culture, and how we might be seeing some changes with dating and hooking up after a global pandemic. So anyway, stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back at it at the GSMC Relationship Podcast. And in this segment is going to be fun, because we're going to discuss how COVID may be affecting hookup culture with singles. Bustle did a really cool article. This was written by Emma McGowan and was published April 29th, 2020. And she interviewed some relationship experts to have their opinion on how COVID may be changing the dynamic here with dating and hookup culture. So hookup culture is definitely a broad term and is thrown around quite a bit, and some people may define it in different ways. So for me, though, I would call hookup culture as a sexual encounter between two or more people, and that doesn't necessarily lead to a romantic long-term relationship. So it may just be like a makeout session or to the point where you guys are actually having sex, or maybe like a friends with benefits or something like that. But something that really isn't long-term and romantic. But, you know, it's just somebody that you hook up with. But the first person that was interviewed for this article was a sex and dating coach. And they said that this may give people time to think about what they actually want. Now, a lot of people are just saying like, oh, I can't wait to go to the bars and, you know, take somebody home and pick someone up and meet them and get numbers and stuff. But that isn't going to necessarily change, because it definitely is a fun sexual experience. But for a lot of people, they may discover that might not be what they want. They may not miss it as much as other people do. Or they may have found a different way to dating during the quarantine and during COVID that might work a little bit better for them. So it definitely gives people time to have introspection, as we are all kind of locked in our homes right now, and avoiding people and large crowds as much as we can. And that may lead to you figuring out what might be a better option for you. A relationship podcaster, Heyo, says virtual dates are here to stay. So this virtual first dates seem to be very popular among women, especially because at least according to Jordana Abraham, she says that if a man, she from this interview, it sounds like she's talking about heterosexual cis women looking for heterosexual cis men. But basically that men who are more likely to want to go on a date, on a FaceTime first date, basically, they're more likely to actually be looking for a relationship and not just a hookup. I would assume this would go for other sexual orientations. So if you're a queer couple, I would assume if you met someone else who was gay online and they were okay with having a virtual first date, such as a FaceTime or a Skype date, that those people are going to be more interested in an actual romantic relationship instead of just hooking up. And there's also no problem with having a friends with benefits relationship, but if that's not something you're looking for and you are a single person who's one of those involuntarily single people, it may be better for you to have that type of date. And it also is probably going to make you feel safer. Now, when I was using Tinder, there were a couple dates that I went on that, at first you kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable. And those are people that I unmatched with quickly after the date ended. But having that first date being a FaceTime first date is a pretty cool thing that's come out of quarantine, and that's probably something that's actually going to stick around. This is also great for people who are victims of sexual assault, as there is no physical contact for the first date, and you can you have that first step towards meeting that person in person. So anyway, moving on to the next one. This is from a psychologist, and this I can almost understand. I think the first date, the virtual first date in this one makes the most sense. But this psychologist expects that people are going to move more from no strings attached sex to friends with benefits relationships. So it's a little bit more safer right now during COVID if you are hooking up with a lot of people that you don't know. Who knows what their health status might be like, and you might feel better about hooking up with someone who you know a little bit better than hooking up with strangers. So this psychologist expects that people it's going to be less of like, oh, hey, just met and hooking up with multiple partners instead of having just one friends with benefits that you can trust if, they tell you like, hey, I'm not feeling that great, or I have a fever, I don't think we should meet tonight, whereas a person who you just met who may just want to hook up because they haven't had sex for 3 months because of the quarantine, they're probably less likely to tell you that maybe they have a fever, or, maybe there's a chance, or they just took a COVID test, but they haven't gotten the results back, or something like that. So that more people may be moving towards a friends with benefits type relationship while they're single. So the next person who was interviewed is a sex educator who doesn't believe will practice safer sex. So Tatiana King, who's a blogger for Blex app, she doesn't think that necessarily people are going to be thinking about safer sex, but that maybe they are going to be talking about it more. So King, this is a direct quote from the article. King points out that the recent New York City Health Department memo about safer sex and COVID specifically mentioned that rimming, which is oral sex on the anus, could possibly spread the virus as it has been found in feces. Memos like that, she says, cause dialogue and could get people talking about safer sex. Which I kind of understand. I guess it will open the conversation up because we always need to be discussing safer sex because it is very important. So I could see how this could open up the conversation because, but I guess I do agree with her to the point where we may be thinking about safer sex in a different context. But I would imagine things like using condoms and practicing safe oral sex and things like that could go hand in hand with COVID and with spreading STIs and that kind of thing. So yeah, I guess that also does make sense. A sex tech says that people are going to be learning about their self-pleasure a little bit more. And this is really exciting, I think, because I believe that sex toys are very important and should be a little less taboo, because there are still people who think that sex toys show a insufficient sex life, which doesn't mean anything. I mean, sex toys will just add to your sexual relationship. So basically, during quarantine, people have reported a 150% growth in orders for sex toys that were made online. So if you're at home, people are going to be masturbating more and buying sex toys. And when you are discovering new sex toys, and you're going to discover new things about yourself and what you like sexually. And that is a very big, important thing if you're not having sex that is good or may not be pleasurable for you, you should definitely masturbate more and get toys that you would want to try that might elevate your sex, especially if you're someone who may be marginalized, as gay sex and anal sex is something that a lot of people look down on. There are so many different sex toys out there specifically geared towards gay men and towards lesbian women, and especially women with endometriosis. This is so important because sex can be very painful if you're someone who has endometriosis, which is a disease in the uterus. And so experimenting with sex toys is probably going to help you out a lot. And during the quarantine, everyone had a lot of time to do that, as shown in these sale increases of sex toys, which makes complete sense to me. So yeah, those were all of the people that were interviewed for this article. Again, I don't think I ever said the title. It was published in Bustle, but it's called How the Coronavirus Pandemic Will Affect Hookup Culture According to 5 Experts. So those were the 5 experts. And let me know what you think. I mean, for most of these, I can kind of understand, but definitely I can see virtual dating, or at least a virtual first date sticking around, and also maybe a move towards friends with benefits. I think that because we don't really know a set date on when things are going to go back to normal, because that really is impossible to project. But, you know, I feel like eventually things are probably slowly going to go back to normal. But maybe like within the next year, I bet if you are someone who is single and in participating in hookup culture during within the next year, you may see these differences popping up. But if I were a betting woman, I'd say maybe within a year or so, things are probably going to go back to normal. But who knows? Maybe we as a culture and the people who are contributing to hookup culture may decide that they like how things are now, and things will stay the same after things start going back to normal and there's a vaccine for COVID and things like that. So I guess we'll just have to play the waiting game and see where this all takes us. But that is going to conclude this segment. Please stick around though, because in the next segment, we're going to be going back to talking about single life and 10 recommendations that I'm going to give you that you should try to do if you are a single person right now. So yeah, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. This is going to be our final segment of the podcast, and I wanted to talk about 10 things that, if you are single right now, whether it be voluntary or involuntary, something to try. So we're just gonna get right into it. Number one is treat yourself like a partner would. So that could be like buy yourself a gift or take yourself out on a date. I think I talked about a little bit in the last episode of self-care about how it's so important to spend alone time with yourself. So yeah, if you've been wanting to see a movie, if you've been wanting to go to a new restaurant or something, go take yourself out on a date and treat yourself, I guess. So number two is going to be schedule times to be with people you love. Could be with your friends, with your family. I saw one post that had someone said basically like, oh, well, if people are going to have weddings and like, fun things like that when they're together, or like we'll throw parties together, why not throw a big party with just you and all of your single friends, like get a bunch of champagne, wine, beer, whatever you want to drink, and just have a party with all of your single people that you like in your life. So the third is going to be spontaneous. So now is the time to, if something comes into your life, if a job opportunity comes, or maybe the opportunity to move to a different city, what's stopping you? So be spontaneous, and if something comes into your life that may offer you a big change, this is the perfect time to take that opportunity, because there's nothing else really stopping you. So might as well just kind of follow your heart and go where the wind is pushing you. So number 4, learn to love yourself. Now, this is going to be a time where maybe you might be spending more time by yourself, but you can use this time to love yourself and figure out what is the best forms of self-care for you. Again, if you are interested about self-care, I just did a episode about that earlier this week, so check that out. Learning to love yourself can also mean is figuring out what you like sexually. So that way, when you are in a relationship, or maybe hooking up with people or anything like that, you know the things that are gonna turn you on and the things that you like. So moving on to the next one, it's going to be do the things that you want to do. So if you want to go back to college, or if you want to add some things to your resume, get an internship or something like that, use the time that other people may be spending with their significant other, and use that time to do the things that you want to do, and do the things that's going to help better yourself. This is going to bring me right into number 6, is to work on yourself. Take this time, go to the gym, do the things that you want to do. I'm going to kind of group together 5 and 6 a little bit. But during these times, you don't have to worry about, if your partner wants to watch the new Netflix show that you want to watch, because guess what? It's you, and if you want to watch that new show and maybe your partner doesn't, it doesn't matter. So, or you don't have to worry about skipping ahead on episodes and watching episodes before your significant other does, because it's just you. So do the things that you want, work on yourself, and use this time as quality time for yourself. So number 7 is going to be take a break from looking. This is another thing that's a very popular adage, which is like, oh, well, you'll find love when you're not even looking for it, which, whatever. I guess it's kind of cheesy, but you never know. If you take a break and, you delete the dating apps from your phone and instead just kind of be in the present moment and not worry about, finding someone or meeting someone or something like that. And, just take a break from dating and stuff, even if it's just for a few weeks. It'll give you time to, focus on yourself and, not worry about trying to get a date or trying to get numbers or trying to get, another person in your life. And just be mindful during that time. And number 8 is going to be picky. So now is the time to be really picky about who you want to date in the future, because right now you are single, and you know what? You don't want to jump into something if it's not going to be healthy, or if that person isn't going to be right for you, because you don't want to be stuck in a relationship like that. So be picky, make sure they have a job and a car, and, and so, if they come up with some stuff that you would like in a relationship, and decide what things are going to be deal breakers and what things you can live without. I wouldn't recommend, making something that is to the T exactly what you want, and you can never venture out of there. Like, it's fine to have deal breakers. For example, mine is no kids, as I don't want kids. So if somebody wants kids or has kids, it's going to be a no from me. Keep an open mind though, because you never know, if someone who is outside of your own, rules and, or attractiveness, they might be, somebody that's for you. So keep an open mind, while keeping your boundaries and your deal breakers that you're comfortable with, at the top of the list, and focus on, the more important things. So number 9 is to travel. As I said in the last episode, I believe too, I am a big proponent of solo traveling. It can be done. I solo traveled when I was 22. So this, and I'm a woman, so a lot of people will get really scared, like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if it's safe. Like, I'm telling you, I was 22 and I just went to Europe for 3 months. I lived in people's houses. I helped people learn English and things like that. So it was more, financially okay for me. So there are ways you can travel on a budget. You can get workaway jobs and things like that, and work in hostels and stuff. So believe me, there are ways. And the number one best thing about traveling alone, the majority of the time that I'm traveling alone. And I'm telling you, you can go wherever you want. You can spend as much time in places. I love going to museums, and I have spent like up to 3 hours in museums, and I don't care because it's only me, and so I make it so like I have enough time to do all the things. If you just want to walk around the city aimlessly for hours, no one's stopping you because you're by yourself. So, and the number one thing that people who are in the elderly people, basically, they'll say that their number one the number one thing that they wish they did more of in life was travel. So definitely travel when you can. And a great time to do that is when you're single. And the last thing is going to be to just enjoy it. Okay, there's a lot of good things that come with being single. You're going to learn more about yourself. You're going to have more time for yourself and for the things that you actually like and appreciate doing. And that's going to help you become a person that you are proud of. And so you're going to learn how to love yourself on your own without having needing someone else to love you. And these are all things that you can do when you're single. And so when you find someone who is worth your time because you've spent time working on yourself, you know that you are going to be well adjusted and smart enough to be able to enter into a healthy and positive relationship. So take the time of you being single to enjoy it, learn more about yourself, and do the things that you want to do without having anyone else stopping you. And who knows, maybe you might decide that being single is a better option for you. And you can be one of those cool, secure attachment, and voluntarily single people that no one seems to study in psychology. But yeah, those are the top 10 things to do when you're single, or not top 10, but 10 things to do in practice if you're single. And that is going to wrap up the podcast. I do want to thank Ben again for giving me this idea of doing this episode. Again, he commented on a post at our Instagram page, which is at GSMC_relationship podcast. So if you have an idea about an episode or a topic you'd like me to go over, please post it onto Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, and let me know what you want to hear and what you'd like me to talk about. I will absolutely take your ideas and your stuff like that. I have a growing list to keep these episodes coming out twice a week. So, but yeah, anyway, please, like I said, give us a like and, subscribe and give us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps people boost us on the chart, and so more people can know. And if you do have someone, a friend or something who you think might enjoy this podcast, please share it with them. Do all those cool things. Anyway, I'm going to see you guys next week. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, you've been listening to the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Network. And everyone, have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.